So we'll work on the lead vocal first. So I'm just going to do this on the spot. Obviously, where I'm listening in this room, I've never heard these speakers before, so I'm not 100% sure that what I'm hearing is how it should be, but I'll do my best with what I can hear. So I actually use, obviously you get to use stereo monitors, but I actually use, if anyone knows of SonarWorks, it used to be called Reference, now it's called Sound ID, and you can calibrate your speakers to cancel out the room EQ basically, so you're getting a flat enough response. And I don't know what I'd do without that now, to be honest, because the room I'm in is actually not very good at all. So yeah, I'm usually working on a flat response EQ, and I can trust then what I'm hearing is, I've got used to that and I can trust that. But where I am right now, I'm just going to do the best I can, but show you the plugins I'd use and the logic behind what I'd be doing. So first thing I do, now when I get sent mixes a lot, it drives me mad the amount of mixes I get sent, and they just haven't cut out the silence on all the takes. So we've got coughs and mouth noises is a really common one, just get these little sounds. And it drives me mad, and people just send those along, and for a mix I'm like, well, this needs to be edited first. So I'm really fussy about making sure all the space in everything I've recorded has been removed manually. And the reason I do it manually is because if you use a noise gate, if you ever use a noise gate on a vocal, especially a vocal with dynamics in it, you can't get the setting to fit all. Like, you'll put the threshold quite high and the quiet singing parts won't come through, or you put it quite low and then you're getting all the breaths and the noises come through anyway. So I wouldn't recommend using a noise gate on a vocal, especially one that's particularly dynamic like this one. If it was just kind of all belted all the way through the song and it was all fairly consistent dynamically, maybe you can get away with it. But I like to remove, like there's been points when before I used to be this picky about removing all the silence. There'd be points when I'd be working on the mix and I'd hear like a click and I'm like, what's that click? And I'd be going through all the tracks. Why is there a click? And all it was just a mouth noise that was left on the track. And you can just spend ages trying to work out why there's a click in your track and you don't know what it is, and is it one of the percussion things? And so from the get-go, this also in Logic, it used to be called strip silence. This is better than a noise gate, but I still don't use it. Now it's called remove silence from audio region. Strip silence was sounded a bit more catchy to me. So you can play with this one because you can see the whole thing, how it is adjusting. Why is that? So yeah, you can adjust the threshold to get that right, and it does a pretty good job if you play around the settings. But I still find, say you've got this really soft line, a word that ends with a very gentle S, like caress. That S will still end up being cut off, so you end up going through manually checking it all anyway. So I feel like, well, if you're going to do that, you may as well just manually cut it. So I don't bother with that either, and it takes time, but I'll go through, just get my tools, and just cut it all out like this. And I know it takes time. I'll get the fade on there as well. But this is another thing, maybe it's a bit controversial for some people, is I mostly cut out all the breaths from a vocal performance. And I know some people are like, oh, that's ridiculous, breathing is natural, of course it's part of the performance. It's not that I've got a problem with the breathing. It's that, particularly with like a pop song, where vocal is pretty much consistent all the way through with not much space in it, I feel like those little gaps where there are no vocal, you at least want to just have a little bit of levity from the vocal and hear a bit of the production. But if in that little bit of a gap you've got that going over it, you can't help but be drawn to it. So I'm very careful. Like if it's a breath, a very short one between two words that would sound unnatural if I removed it, then I'll leave it there. But if I can, I'll remove all the breaths. It sounds much more effortless the way it's sung. You don't get drawn to this kind of sucking in of someone breathing or making noises. So I top and tail each phrase very carefully, like so. So you have to just go through, listen. So I might have just taken a bit too much of that T there. And then I'll put a fade on the top and the end, top and tail. Tell them you'll skip plans tonight. So it's hard to, you've got to make sure you don't cut off the end of the phrases. Is there a T there? I can't hear where I am, but sounds like a bit of an Americanized T there.
They don't need to know this.
So, you know, like the S, you can't really see on the... So if I went, oh, there we go, we'll cut that. It looks like I'm going to cut the S off. See, I've cut the notice. The S sound even. But still too much. So it takes a lot of time. But it's surprising how much you can make a mix sound really clean by having none of these kind of, especially if you, another thing is noise floor. If you audio interface that you've recorded with, it's not particularly great and you've had to use quite a bit of gain, you're going to get that on the take. So I don't want that when you've got compression on that vocal, that noise floor is going to get louder. I don't want the hissing sound. I don't want the noises. And the reason I fade, I assume they teach this to you kind of early on. I can remember they taught it to us in university. Literally first lesson was just topping and tailing with fades. And the reason you do that, you could literally, I could cut all this without putting any fades on anything. And you might play it through and you might have 0 issues. But sometimes what happens is when you start putting in on more plugins and you've got loads of other tracks going on and software instruments, and perhaps your computer's not a super powerful computer, it usually depends on how strained your CPU is. You can get little pops that will just kind of go, when it hits like that, when it hits that point that it doesn't have a fade on it. If you put the fade on it, that won't happen. It'll never happen. So you just, it's not even it's not an audible fade. It's not like you can hear it fading in and fading out. It's just literally just the top and tail of that region to make sure it doesn't have a little pop or click if your computer's struggling, because I've even heard that on, I've heard it on like commercial tracks. I can't remember one in particular. I can remember hearing a little pop somewhere thinking, I know what that is. Someone just hasn't put a fade on something and it's just made a little pop. And sometimes you can play the same, you can play one section, you can play it back, it doesn't pop, and then you play it again and it does pop. It just depends on if your computer's struggling with what's going on with the processing. Even more irritating, you do an offline bounce and you realised it popped on the offline bounce, and you've sent it off your track going, there we go, it's great, send it to distribution. And that's happened to me once, so it's worth checking. I guess that's why the philosophy behind doing real-time bounces still kind of means something, but yeah, just because you're listening through to it one final time before you sign it off and commit to it. So yeah, so I will cut all that really tight. It'll be the same then with the harmonies. I would just group cut them all, group top and tail them. I've got some automation there somewhere. And make sure everything is super clean. And now here's one I made earlier. So I'll mute these now. And then this is what we have. So I've done all that. You can see here it's all tidied, it's all top and tailed. There's no noises, there's no pops, there's no clicks. It's all very clean. So now we get on to kind of plugins and mixing and what I would do for that.